It is my pleasure, my honor to introduce to you the man of the hour, the world's leading expert on urban warfare, an incredible man, Colonel John Spencer. All right, well, here we are. This is great.
Well, thanks for that warm welcome, and thanks for everybody being here on a late night. Wonderful and amazing welcome to Canada. My Canadian friends say my visit to the Canadian side of the Niagara Falls didn't count. So this is my first real visit, and an honor.
Amazing. So let's get right into it. Israel is facing a seven-front war. Hamas, Hezbollah, the Islamic Republic, Syria, Iraq, the Houthis, different groups operating in Judea, Samaria, like the Lion's Den. Israel is facing non-military threats from Muslim Brotherhood, financing terror from Qatar, verbal threats now from Turkey, and the potential of escalation from Russia, China, North Korea, and other rogue states. Who is the biggest threat, in your opinion, from top to bottom? Who do we have to worry about the most right now?
Without question, I know you'll have some hard questions. That one's not hard. It is the Islamic regime in Iran. Its interest to get a nuclear weapon for the sole purpose of destroying Israel, for rewriting the entire Middle East and eventually the world. These aren't my words, these are their words. The countdown in there, everything. That's an easy one. Amir.
Who's the least threat?
So that's the problem, I think, historically, is putting people in this hierarchy and saying, well, that's a lesser of a threat. I can put it in a box. I can contain that threat. In the interconnected world today, with Iran and the Islamic regime's use of its proxies and the hierarchy of its proxies to do this, I don't put any of them at the bottom of the list. They're all threats with interconnected importance. Some are on, like Hezbollah is a massive threat to the survival of Israel. It is its connections to the Islamic regime, its capabilities, it's the potential, but it's all connected. So I think that has gotten the world in some amounts of trouble when they put threats in a box and say, well, that one's just a lesser of a threat. And then not that you take your eye off of it, but you orient to what you think the bigger threat is, and nuclear arms is the biggest threat. But I don't like to answer that question.
That's fair. Knowing you were going to say the Islamic Republic, this question is specific to that. Why hasn't Israel gone after them? They are the ones that are causing the terror. They're funding the Houthis. Hezbollah is the Islamic regime. They're giving money to Hamas. They're taking over parts, obviously, of Syria and Iraq. Why hasn't Israel just gone for the snake's head? Cut off the head of the Islamic regime and watch everything else melt.
Well, now these are hard questions. I'm an urban warfare guy. I like to say I'm a one-trick pony. I did teach strategy. The fact that there is no black and white question in the dealing with geopolitics, regional politics, with dealing with Iran, because it is the head of the Islamic regime in Iran. It is the head of this snake. It is the octopus with many tentacles. But Israel is a very small nation in a sea of threats. It doesn't have black and white dilemmas. Why can't, it's a clear threat, take it out. The geopolitical implications, the people making it harder to deal with the Islamic regime, like the United States, the foreign, and I don't do politics, so John Spencer's opinion with no affiliation, but a multi-decade foreign policy approach of insanity with the Islamic regime, but continuing to do the same thing, expecting a different outcome. Whether it's the JPCOA, whether it's other things, like us imposing our values, which is where we got to this world that we're in. They don't have our values. They don't have humanitarian interests. They tell you, they show you, they act that way, they do everything they do. But I know it's complicated. I won't give too many dead military theorists at you, like Sun Tzu and others, but in war, and we've been at war for a long time, we're at war on many fronts. And Israel is definitely, like you said, on many, many fronts in active war, as in acts of war, threats to its survival. But the interconnectedness of Iran to the region, to Iran to Russia, I mean, the fact that Russia had to go to the Islamic regime for drones to commit its real genocide in Ukraine, there are interconnectedness here where it isn't as simple, although it is simple on the world cannot allow the Islamic regime to have a nuclear weapon. That's easy. That's a simple, and like you know, Israel has taken matters into their own hands because it literally, sometimes we say that, like survival. It will take in its own hands when, even within this interconnected world where there is a clear need, necessity, vital strategic interest to take out. And I believe Israel will do that if necessary. It would love not to have to do that. And one thing that would really help is stop giving the Islamic regime billions of dollars.
So what is the reason that they're even giving them the money? What is that? I mean, this is more of a political question, I understand, but
yeah,
there's got to be some kind of military answer to this in terms of the benefits that America gets in doing this. I mean, when a country calls for the destruction and the death of America and calling them the big devil, and the big devil's like, thank you very much, here's $1 billion. How does that make any sense? Is there a military strategy here?
There's an idea when we teach in class, the idea of a nation having a grand strategy. It's very dubious. Like, what is the United States' grand strategy? What is Israel's, which is really clear, survival is one of its grand strategies, and then it's not going anywhere. Because it's not just one, like this administration or the past administration's approach to Iran. There have been lots of foreign policy, and General McMaster wrote a really good book about his time as a national security advisor, and he covers Iran and strategic narcissism, which is, again, us believing that they are us. We just have to give them something a little bit more, and they'll act like us. So that has been years and years, but there's also, every nation has their internal issues, and they just want the problem to go away. If I just give you money, will you stop developing nuclear weapons? Yes, sure, I'll do that. So you give them money, you give them sanctions relief, and then they don't. That's really in war, not that war is simple, but the enemy will let you know if you did something wrong. In national geopolitical foreign policy, you don't know, or it is of your hierarchy of internal interests, you're trying to push that problem down the road for somebody else to deal with because it's too hard. It's too hard to take a leadership position and the cost that it will be even to your nation, economic interconnectedness, the vital parts of the Straits of Hormuz, you name it in the region. I know enough to know that these are very complex decisions, but sometimes you just need leadership.
If and when, let's hope, Israel takes out Khomeini and the Islamic Republic, just takes them out, which we all want, the whole world, I think. Where do you see Iran from that moment? Are there other concerns militia-wise, or are there any other groups within Iran that would want to take power and just be a continuation of what we're seeing with the Islamic Republic that you know?
And there are people in the audience who are way better qualified to answer that than me. I know that.
There you go, Hezbollah, they're saying.
There are concerns. This is also, there is, especially as a student of U.S. foreign policy, there is scar tissue in believing that you know what will work. Yeah. That led us to many of the problems that is the Islamic regime today. I know from enough friends that the Iranian people don't want the mullah regime.
100%. Nobody does, right? So, I want to ask you a question about the Philadelphia corridor.
Yeah. More my lane.
Yeah, I hear you. So, do you agree with the Tikva Forum hostage families that increasing military pressure on Hamas is necessary to secure and the release of the loved ones, of the hostages? Or do you think Israel should relinquish the corridor in exchange for some hostages, despite their concerns that doing so will not only strengthen Hamas and the potential of remaining hostages smuggled across the border to Yemen and Iran? What are the potential consequences of either choice?
One is an understanding, again, John Spencer's analysis of the situation is that has become a media point, a belief that that's the only thing standing in the way of the hostages coming home. When Hamas has never said that. Hamas has never said, if you leave the Philadelphia corridor, we will return the hostages. It wasn't part of one of the bridging strategies that Israel has agreed to the bridging strategy. Hamas has every time said no. The media has turned that into Israel refuses to leave the Philadelphia corridor. That's the only reason that the hostages won't come home. That's not true, according to Hamas and according to Israel. But somehow the outside world knows better. And we say that that's the issue. If they would just leave the Philadelphia corridor, the hostages, all 101 remaining hostages in Israel, it's just not a fact. Do I know, as Israel, that Hamas created this psychological warfare, and it's demonstrated it viciously recently, what the hostages do to the people of Israel, to the government, to cause it to have an intractable, no solution, nothing that can be done. This is my firm ideal, and I've written this, as you know, is the ideal, and I'm a parent, I would be in Gaza trying to get my child, and this is the psychological warfare. But the ideal that Hamas would have given the hostages back, or will give the hostages back, if you give them everything they want. It's just not true. If you leave Gaza tomorrow, Hamas might signal that, but I guarantee they won't do that. That's not their history. It's only been through the use of all forms of national power, multiple nations, and especially IDF military pressure that has caused Hamas to have to make a decision on, if I want to survive for a little longer, because they are all dead men walking, according to John Spencer. I'm a very critical thinker. I am objective as I possibly can. I'm very pro-truth. Hamas's history in taking of Gilad Shalit, the remaining, there are Israeli civilians that have been there for years. No matter what Israel offered, they would not give them back. And you know the story of the one soldier they held for 5.5 years. They never knew where he was. They exchanged him for over 1,000 hostage prisoners, criminals, to include Yahya Sinwar. There is a myth out there that I face in my analysis that on October 8th, Hamas offered to give all the hostages back. That's a lie. It just isn't rational. We impose our values on Hamas. Not we, I don't. People do. That they're rational actors. They care about their people. They've never said that. They want the release of all the prisoners in Israel, and that means they'll turn a new leaf. They've never said that. They want a two-stage solution. They've never said that. They want self-determination. They want human rights. They want equality. They've never said that. The only thing they've ever said is we want the destruction of Israel and the death of Jews around the world. So the idea that Israel is going to get the hostages back, there's another way to do it. Just give them what they want. Specifically on the Philadelphia corridor, why is the Philadelphia corridor so important? In war, it's really hard to cut the enemy off from supplies, from oxygen that it needs to breathe, men, weapons, equipment, money, ammo. We didn't do it in Vietnam, Afghanistan, Iraq, many wars, porous borders, going on and on. They just keep resupplying themselves. That is the super highway to Hamas. And of course, they want it to be a major issue. They love the fact that the world has said, if you just leave Rafah, they'll do anything for that. Because that's their oxygen. That's their hope to survive the war. That's all they have to do. Hold hostages and survive the war, they win. By military definition. So Rafah is really important. Does that mean that Israel can never leave the Rafah, or the border between Gaza and Egypt? No. If you've seen pictures, they have a blacktop highway they built in just a couple weeks through Israel's capabilities. They found hundreds of tunnels, ones you can drive through, and they're sealing those. They could soon leave it and still be secure, but they have to cut Hamas from the oxygen it wants to survive. But the fact is that not even Hamas says that would mean if they left tomorrow that they would get hostages back.
And speaking of Rafah, everybody remembers all eyes on Rafah. Don't go to Rafah, don't go to Rafah, don't go to Rafah. I think we're going to go to Rafah. Hostages, and of course the Philadelphia corridor. What they found was a tunnel coming in from Egypt. Tell me what you think of this theory. How much truth there is to this based on your knowledge. America told Israel not to go because what are they losing from this? What is the benefit from having constant war? We know because of this tunnel, Hamas is getting constant missiles, probably cement, steel, whatever they need. You mentioned earlier, how is all the cement coming in? There's no high-rise buildings. Probably because it's getting smuggled in. Egypt has been getting billions of dollars. Second most amount of money, I think, out of any country in the Middle East. Israel being the first. To do what? Nothing. To close their eyes and allow it to happen. This is a theory. This is not fact, okay, guys? This is just what makes sense. It seems like common sense. America's paying Egypt. Egypt allows Hamas to get their things. Israel needs to buy military weapons and aid. They get money from the U.S. They buy it back from the U.S. And so on. Business continues as usual. How much truth do you think there is to that? I know this is not war specific, but you have so much experience in this type of world. You understand the psychology of war. So is that just a bit too cuckoo bananas?
It's not cuckoo bananas. It's
because you're American.
I am American.
So
that's a fact. I bleed red, white, and blue. But I know enough to know that I don't know all the things involved in that scenario you gave. Everything from Egypt, which has a peace agreement with Israel. That's strategic. The Suez Canal is strategic. Egypt has a lot of internal problems. It has its history with the Muslim Brotherhood. It is not as stable as I think some people would like, and they know that. I do wish, again, my friends know I'm a very simple person. I teach a lot of one-on-one classes because that's the level I think at. Like, let's go back to the basics. Let's just use geography here. On what is the Sinai Desert? Where is Egypt, Cairo? What is this vast terrain that is here? To include Rafah, the city of Rafah. Most people don't know that Rafah used to be on the Egypt side of the border as well. In Egypt, when nobody cared, to be honest, I can find a couple articles. Egypt in 2017, 16 said, look, this is too much of a problem. All 50,000 Palestinians on this side of my border, you got to go away. And they destroyed most of their buildings, filled their tunnels with sewage and water, and mass displaced the 50,000 Palestinians on the Egypt side of Rafah. But this idea of the tunnels, and did Egypt know about it? How could they do that? I know it's complex. I know that there are Bedouin tribes in that area that have for generations been a part of smuggling things, that there were probably people that knew about it. I think there were a lot of people that didn't, even in main Egypt, but these are all speculation. I do all unclass research myself. Most of it is just John opinion. I know there's enough complexity there. For me, that's kind of like, we got to learn from that. Like that, and you want to maintain the relationship. Israel's strength is its allies, to include its relationship with Egypt, Jordan, Saudi Arabia. The fact that you have Arab nations protecting Israel when it's under attack by the Islamic regime, cruise missiles, ballistic missiles, and drones. That's showing Israel's strength, and it's really important to just a simple, like, why don't they just do something about that? I know enough to know that there's a lot of conversations going on, and having that normalization, relationships, peace agreements, whatever you want to call it, Abraham Accords, is very strategic to Israel's strength. What's more concerning to me about that area is the fact that, and every nation gets to make their own, and I believe in sovereign borders, that Egypt wasn't encouraged more to create a displaced person camp just on the other side of the border. that, in my personal opinion, with no affiliation, Egypt owns much of the death and destruction that's happened in Gaza just by a terrain base. They have their reasons, but I think they should be called to account for, there is really no reason, you have your reasons that are not rational on why you couldn't create a massive international tent city just on the other side of the border. And if you, again, the map of the size of the Sinai Desert versus where Egypt is, just an area, if you understand how small geography of the Al-Mawasi camp that Israel was forced to make within Gaza, that in the history of war, I can't find a case like that where the population can't become refugees. They don't have, literally, there's nowhere completely safe, although I would call it a humanitarian safer zone because of Hamas, because if anywhere that's created, Hamas then goes to that area. But the fact that Egypt did not allow for any, matter of fact, they closed the Rafah crossing to include of humanitarian aid going in. The tunnels are very problematic. There's a solution to it. There's no solution to going back and for thousands of Palestinians that have died because of Hamas in Gaza, that Egypt could have been a huge, game-changing factor in saving civilian lives.
Saving Palestinian lives too, right?
Yeah.
Speaking of the tunnels, I do want to get into it a bit. It's kind of a highlight in terms of your knowledge. For those who don't know, he's been to Gaza 3 times. He's been to the tunnels inside to see what it's like and experience it. You mentioned the advanced technology in terms of, it's a tunnel after all, but advanced for being a tunnel. The hostages, there are so many of them that are hidden within these tunnels. What are they experiencing in terms of, I shouldn't say quality of life, but what are they experiencing?
Yeah, as a student of underground warfare, I know that it's almost foreign to the human body to be in that environment. There are soldiers that go into it, and within minutes, if not hours, they get claustrophobia, vertigo, they lose sense of time, they pass out, you can't breathe the air. There's so many contaminants. Even in a nice tunnel, you can't see, you lose some of your senses, everything. It is like being underwater. And where they found the hostages, because Hamas has some luxury tunnels. They found Hamas command tunnels with air conditioning, barracks, bathrooms, ceiling fans. That's not where they're holding the hostages. In Rafah, especially, where they murdered and held the hostages, starved the hostages, it was a cramped, you couldn't stand up. They're having to go to the bathroom in the same area that they're breathing. They're having to take turns sleeping. It is so inhumane, which I personally think there are some international groups whose responsibility it is to check on even illegally held prisoners of war, but how that's not. It's just awful. Even the Hamas guidebook to tunnels that recently was discovered talks about you got to rotate forces. You can't leave people underground. It's really bad for your health. It starts to really deteriorate your health, and for hostages to be held in that environment for 11 months, it's just inhumane.
I want to talk about Hezbollah. This has always been, an organization that Israel has been careful not to get into a full-blown war. It's believed that they have, and correct me if I'm wrong, 150,000 ballistic missiles.
Open source guesstimates.
Sure. So they're a powerful entity. They've been bombing Israel since October 8th. I think it was right the day after.
Yep.
And as you've mentioned, I know 100,000+ Israelis moved south because they can't live it.
Homeless.
So now Israel is, just a few weeks ago, they said, okay, we're activating this plan, we're going to start going in. And a lot of people were saying we're expecting just so many missiles, it's going to be a disaster. We're not going to be able to stop half of them. They're stratospheric missiles, others. That hasn't really happened yet. They haven't really started their retaliation. I mean, to some degree, if they're as powerful as we believe them to be, they haven't really done much. And is there an explanation to do you have any theories as to what their strategy might be, what they're thinking? Because I mean, we're going in now. What are you thinking?
The Hezbollah, which is a massive terror military with direct state sponsorship, Hezbollah does not blow its nose without the Islamic regime's permission. That's why they haven't done more, although they've done a lot. In any other context, Hezbollah's attack of Israel daily since October 8th they are acts of war and warrant one of the few reasons in which we as nation states we all agree that if there's going to be a war, Article 51 self-defense is a just reason. And Hezbollah's attack of Israel under any other condition would warrant an act of war warranting self-defense to stop that, not a threat, attack. Hezbollah has launched thousands of rockets at Israel, has burned down hundreds of homes and agriculture, and doing so much, but it doesn't act. The reason that it hasn't launched is because the Islamic regime of Iran has a strategy in which it wants to destroy Israel and then the United States, because that's what they say. Little Satan, great Satan. That's why Hezbollah hasn't done the things that it could do. And it's also a very geopolitical game of chess, where every person is in a state of, this is what I know I can get away with. Tit for tat, Iran, or the Islamic regime of Iran's launch of it, which is significant. Nobody wants escalation is what they say. Look, I'm a student of war. I don't agree with rocket diplomacy. Basically, well, you're really good at defending against those, so you should just let them do that. We don't want escalation. But I'm also a very, very simple thinker, very rational. Like, no, they're attacking. Doesn't matter if I can stop the attacks. This is, again, when people's misunderstanding of the law of war. The law of war doesn't say, well, if you don't have a good effect, then it doesn't mean as much. No, the intent and the act are what matters, not the effect. That's why I believe, and this also is why certain things can't be done against Hezbollah. It is the Islamic regime's crown jewel. It would trigger, because Iran says it will. The Islamic regime says if you try to destroy Hezbollah, we will enter the war. And again, what's your definition of enter the war? When you launch 300 cruise ballistic drone missiles at another nation, that's entering a war. But I understand the geopolitical aspects of it, of what people think the order is. And there is a bit of, not tit for tat, but there is a bit of order. Most people don't understand when there's been an upset to the order. And I think that was April 12th, when the Islamic regime launched that full, massive, wasn't little, wasn't meant to not do any harm, it meant to do a lot of harm. And Israel was told, look, call to win. 90% of those were knocked down. And I'm very proud as an American, starting on October 7th, when the United States and other nations said Israel had to stand alone before, it never will again. Those are words. On April 12th, there was action. When it wasn't just the United States, but it was United States servicemen helping defend Israel, but it was also Jordan and others, which is crazy, right? But what I also get frustrated with Hezbollah is that even if they don't attack, anybody believes that the status quo that is now is acceptable. That any other nation it is okay in the concern about escalation to have 100,000 civilians homeless for over a year at the cost of the nation, living in the hotels, kids doubling on schools, that state of status quo is okay. It's really, I think, problematic is that this can't continue. Now, I will agree with everybody that we don't want escalation. So this is for 11 months. Israel, United States, many other nations have tried to find a diplomatic means of, hey, how about the United States or the UN Security Council 1701 is adhered to? That'd be something new. Why don't Hezbollah stop attacking? That'd be really nice. So if Israel, which it has shown a lot of restraint up to this point, has to reestablish its borders, it really needs to reestablish deterrence. But it is also after almost a year of trying any other way, diplomatic power, through multiple nations, to include going to the Islamic regime of Iran, saying, could you have your proxy stop attacking Israel? And this is the world we live in.
There's something to be said about the success of Hamas over its people, the domination, the brutality. People, we understand what Hamas has done to Israelis and people from all over the world. So many hostages aren't even just from Israel, they're from all over the world. It makes no difference, they can get away with it. There's a psychological part of this that I want to ask you about. How has Hamas been able to take all the money, all the funding, all the aid, never build anything good for anybody, just oppress, not only that, kill them if they take food that's been brought in. We've seen evidence of that, beating people and killing people, launching missiles that land within their own territory. Who cares?
Well, that number goes towards Israel did that.
Of course.
Yeah.
Well, it's what the media says is what it is. Yeah. So, like the hospital that we mentioned, the hospital that was bombed, thousands dead, and it was the jihadists who dropped the bomb in a parking lot. How are they still able to get the support of so many Palestinians within Gaza? How is it that they're getting away with, you poke the guy and then you run away and he turns over and he blames the guy over here. Why are you poking me? It's like they've just been getting away with it for so long. Like you said, the billionaires, Khalid Mashal is a billionaire. All of them, they're all insanely rich because they keep all the foreign aid. How is it that the people haven't said, no, I think we're done with this, we need to fight back? Like, is there going to be a point where if things just get so bad, the people will actually, has there been a time in history where this has been similar? Where the people of a nation are allowed this type of brutality and they never come back from it? They don't fight back?
So I have a historian friend with me, so I regularly murder history. So I could give you instances of popular uprisings against totalitarianism, against dictators. It isn't as common in history, but context. If you want to talk about just Gaza, it is a radicalized population. Those are facts. There are methods to do that, to include in the school books in which the UN people are overseeing UNRWA. And this is not John Spencer's opinion, this is fact based on the textbooks. One of the most shocking to me was watching the Palestinian version of Sesame Street in Gaza. I don't know if you've seen that, but it is shocking. Because I have young kids who watch Sesame Street, and you always try to control screen time, but this was multiple channels of Sesame Street to start radicalization of children before they can really even read. And what the characters of this Sesame Street. It's going to this ideal, but what your question I think is trying to lead to is, where do we go from here? The decades of radicalization through, again, the Islamic regime's proxy, which it doesn't care about religion, right? Shia, Sunni, doesn't care. If it can radicalize a population to do its will, to actually warp their own religion. It's not Islam what Hamas believes. I have Muslim friends, that's not Islam. But to radicalize a population, there are lots of academic studies. How do you do that with school books and madrasas or church religion, and imams and leaders, and there's a systematic way of actually even being the person that gives them a little bit, gives them their food, there's so many forms of coercive power. Decades but that's also an acknowledgement of what it would take to de-radicalize. I get that question a lot. Like the Hamas is just a problem. If we just get Hamas out, then the day after can start. De-radicalization, there's plenty of academic study on what that takes, where it has worked, where it has not worked. I can tell you with very strong thoughts, it can't even start until you remove those with the actual coercive power. Hamas, not just their guns, but right now, today, Hamas uses the humanitarian aid that Israel is flooding, a real flooding into Gaza, but has still created an environment where Hamas is the one who takes it and controls giving it because it's power. You can't start de-radicalization, which there's a process of bringing in actual legitimate actors to build institutions, to include education systems, to be the voices that say that there's even a reconciliation process where people that were radicalized, there are ways to do reconciliation with those. But it's a multi-year, if not generational thing that people would have to commit to. It's not just Israel's problem. The radicalization of the Gazan population, it's a problem. It's not an unsolvable problem. I always quote this because I like to beat up history and mess with my historian friends. After the defeat of the Nazi regime, General Eisenhower said it would take 50 years to denazify the Germans. It did not. There are reasons it did not, because there were established institutions, there was bureaucrats, intelligentsia, there was people that could be a part of the rebuilding of the society. In Gaza, that's going to be really hard to do, not impossible. So is it going to take more than 50 years? I don't know. But I can tell you, I don't have all the answers, and if I did, I'd probably make a lot more money than I do. I am a person that can tell you with very confidence, if Hamas is not removed, there is no de-radicalization, and there is no break of the cycle of violence. And I will keep saying it, Hamas does not want a two-state solution. That is not the foreign policy easy button to push. They have never asked for it. They said they don't want it. They want a one state. It's just without any Jews on it.
Is there a genocide in Gaza?
There is no genocide in Gaza. But let me tell you why I don't even like saying the word. For me, I'm not Israeli. I'm not Jewish. I am a student of war. I'm a student of history. I think it is repulsive to use the word created to explain the worst human travesty in our history, the Holocaust. But it has meaning. Words have meaning. Although people seem to not know that in our modern age, what does proportionality mean? What does starvation mean? What does indiscriminate mean? Genocide has a definition. It has subcomponents of intent to destroy by purpose or through process a certain category of people. If Israel is trying to commit genocide in Gaza, they're the worst nation to ever do it in the history of mankind. And I think this gets to what I'm most quoted on, and this isn't John Spitzer, it's the data. Quote me on my research, not on my statements. Israel has done more, and I'll put the caveats on there because I have friends that study war. Israel has implemented more measures to prevent civilian harm in Gaza than any military in history. So how are they trying to commit a genocide and the irrational people are like, well, they're trying to do it in a sneaky way by feeding them, fixing their water pipes, flooding vaccinations in, moving the civilians out of the way and trying to get to Hamas who are in the civilians. It's just not critical thinking. It's repulsive to use that word in context with anything going on in Gaza.
Can you offer any tips as to how to change this narrative? Because the whole world is calling it this, and they use their simple little children rhymes.
Yes.
And we sit there and we're like, well, actually, according to the Balfour Declaration, it's 37 years. Stop. What's the best way to combat this? How do we, is there a simple definition that we could just say it's not because?
I mean, you could literally make a poster. Genocide is defined as this. There's intent and action, and then there are 4 categories that are a part of the genocide. Or giving them an example of what genocide looks like. I've also been very critical of the Russia-Ukraine war. There's an actual warrant for the arrest of President Putin for stealing the babies of Ukraine and giving them to Russian parents, and they'll never know they were Ukrainian or where they came from. That falls under the definition of genocide. Systematically trying to erase a culture, an identity, a nationality. So maybe give them some counterfactual sometimes. I often say, which it's a true statement, sometimes it sticks, is like, you can have your own opinions, you can't have your own facts. So this gets to, according to the ICJ, Israel is committing genocide. That's a lie. That is not what the ICJ ruled on. ICJ ruled on that it was plausible that there was a case in which they could hear at a further in time, and there was nothing actually convincing enough in the evidence to make a ruling to tell Israel in the meantime, stop operations. Because there is plausibility. It's so weird. Misinformation usually has a kernel of truth. There was an ICJ case that was heard in front of the ICJ, and this is what they said. I'm like, well, maybe I got to put that on a 5x card for you to read it. Because no, the ICJ did not say that Israel is committing genocide in Gaza. It says there's a plausible case in which there could be a case. And I'm not an international lawyer. I did sleep at a Holiday, well, I was at Hilton last night. But I know enough. I can Google some of these things and come up with the answers instead of listening to Tucker Carlson or whoever, Candace Owens or whoever the influencer is, and their lies. I foolishly believe that the truth can fight against the lies. And the worst thing that can happen, when I tell people all the time to ask me, one, to do more talks, and I'm trying, what can we do? Well, one of the things that we can do is not give up. Because even in this fight against misinformation, social media, influencers, guys trying to rewrite World War II and say Churchill was the bad guy. We can't allow them to think that they just have so many followers and so much momentum and the lie. And now you have literally world leaders, so hold our elected officials accountable. Stop saying that there's been 41,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza. Because there hasn't been. Again, words have meaning. According to Hamas, there have been 41,000 Palestinians that have died in Gaza.
They would never lie.
Yeah.
Hamas doesn't lie.
This is the craziness. Again, you're going to make me get political, and I can't. Words have meaning. Facts are facts. The way you structure a sentence can turn it into a lie. And Hamas does not have moral equivalency with Israel.
Correct.
There is no equal sides. One is a democratic Western nation of moral values. Yes, they're not perfect. I can tell you that there is very few that nation. There is no perfect nation in politics. But the ideal that we have to trust the information of Hamas as much as we do Israel's, which is not really what happens. What happens is that everybody believes what's happening that Hamas says because they believe they're the oppressed. Again, we're trying to impose our values on a terrorist organization, an evil terrorist organization that does not want any of the things that the college kids who don't, I guess, know how to Google, that Hamas has never said. Free Palestine from Hamas.
If there's one thing I would like for everybody here to take home with them tonight is when somebody says to you, there's a genocide, and they quote somewhere on TikTok that they heard this, you can say, well, I was in a room with the world's leading expert, and he says, eat shit. We're going to take a couple of questions. If anybody has, we can't go for too long because if we, one question could take a little while. Here you go. Thank you.
Thank you very much, John Spencer and Amir. It's been a very enlightening and wonderful evening to hear you speaking. My question is, I know you don't want to address political issues, but I'm very concerned about there are people in the administration in the United States right now, we've read about that have ties to jihadists or the Islamist extremists, which is very concerning that they're in the position of influence in the White House. And I was wondering, because I'm concerned about what will be in the future if Harris is elected, but I have a specific question. I read, and I don't know if this is absurd or too wild, but I read that the reason that Iran did not attack Israel in retaliation for the assassination is because there was a meeting that took place, that it was a group of, I don't know who it was, and they went to Iran, and that they actually gave them the names of Israeli agents in Iran in exchange for a promise not to attack. Do you know if that's true?
I highly question that report. Just as a rational person who understands how nation states work, I don't speak in certainties, and I think that we should question people that just know. Like, well, how do you know that? Well, I heard. Well, where did you hear? Like, I'm an academic that has to do footnotes and cite sources, and well, just trust me, bro. So I think it sounds highly questionable, and I think I can never say no, but with very high probability, that's a lie.
Hi, my name is Marshall. Similar to that question, after Ismail Haniyeh was blown up in Tehran,
He died.
Okay. Iran sort of implied that the retaliation might come not in Israel, but at an urban or Jewish center in the West. Are Western Jewish centers prepared, or how do they prepare for such an event?
That's a tough one. His question was that Iran, the Islamic regime, said that they wouldn't respond directly to Israel. They would attack a Jewish community somewhere else in Israel. If they said that, then we should hold them as nation states accountable to that threat. This is the idea of do the Jewish community feel safe anywhere? And there are some areas where they feel a lot less safe, and it's on those communities in which they live. They have responsibilities to protect all their citizens, to include those at risk. So I can't answer that with clarity. I have a full awareness of many national security apparatuses who are on guard. You can always be on more guard. You can always apply more resources. So it's a very context-driven, depending on what locations. I do believe there are some places in the world right now where the Jewish people clearly at a higher risk, and their governments aren't doing enough about it.
Hi. My name is Irene Budarov, and thank you for coming. It's great. My question is about, so regardless of Israel, whatever is happening in Israel, so what about the rest of the world? Like the Western civilization, like they're basically waving the white flag and basically submitting to the domination, the Islamic domination all over the world. What happened to France, to Sweden, to England? Like it's where's the Western civilization? That's what's happening in Canada. How do we fight this? This is indoctrination happening here in front of our eyes, and we're sleeping as we're driving on the wheel. And basically, now they're trying to reframe September 11. It's like, and I've seen it on the social media, reframing September 11 as like, how are they going to be teaching the new generation, the Gen Z? So this is happening now. How is the West is fighting this? And they're not fighting it. They're letting it happen through migration, so how do we fight this? They're actually here, everywhere.
Again, thank you for your question. I'm not a political leader. I've been asked, do you want to go into politics? No, I've been to war. I'm good. And I really respect those that do serve in that way. There are many places around the world, and I appreciate you not being specific to allow me to. There are many places. One is an acknowledgement by us, especially if we live in democracies, our elected officials view this as a massive threat. There are a lot of issues. Every nation has their own issues, whether it's immigration, healthcare, education, drugs flowing in. But I do believe that Western civilization is under attack. And that there are a lot of signals. Like you can't. I could talk to you about how October 7th happened. I can tell you that it changed everything as much as 9/11 changed everything. But it matters now what our elected leaders do now. Acknowledge that the Western civilization is under attack, that the Islamic regime is a threat not just to the Middle East, but to the world. It wants to rewrite the world. Russia wants to rewrite Europe. These are massive threats, and some people try to rationalize away. That's not our fight. That's territorial. That's their problem. They caused that problem. Now they're the causes, where the victim becomes the cause of the problem. It's so context driven. There are some places that have a much bigger problem than others in this very specific problem of a threat to their societies. When you have diasporas that aren't assimilating, again, personal opinions. The first step, like we're in AA class, is to acknowledge there's a problem. And that is a national vital interest. That can go as far as, for the United States, why we are concerned that China would have access to the minds of my youth through the use of the TikTok back. There are some massive initiatives, and I think we should highlight the work that is being done. Also, we all have interest that it's not enough. In some areas, there's a lot that needs to be done. I don't have the solutions, or I would have another job.
Hello, hi. My name is Clara, and thank you so much for being here with us. My question is about embargo, and our government just admitted embargo, making embargo to Israel and other countries going to the same direction. How this would threat Israel, this Israeli security right now in the time of war? How could this affect the war? Israel winning the war or losing?
Yeah, I can't talk about U.S. politics. I don't mind talking about Canadian politics. That's bad. I talked earlier today about that. There's near-term effects like withholding large diameter munitions from Israel's ability to fight back against Hezbollah in the north. The weapons embargo, but from a diplomatic, the four forms of national power, diplomatic being one of those. Within that is what you say about your ally, what you say about your nation, how you support them. To include this weapons exchanges, and everybody understands the nuances of that. If there's any government that's making a decision based on lies, so in the case of Israel, Canada, UK, again, I can talk about other people's governments. But I won't. So here's the only thing, like, I'm a very rational person. Why do I not do my research only from what's available open source? I walk the ground. So if Canada or whoever, let's make a fictional government, believes the lies about Israel, and they haven't sent a fact-finding team to Israel, to Gaza, to see it for themselves, then that's wrong. So they're believing in, like, it doesn't, like, I went to school, I know how to critical think, maybe we need to all go back. You're making a decision based on a lack of information, and you're believing, in this case, a terrorist organization or political institutions who have political bias. Again, this is the United Nations using other voices, like, oh, I'm not using Hamas, I'm using this list of other organizations who say these things. Okay, let's analyze each one of those groups. Are they unbiased? Do they have a history of being anti-Israel, anti-Western? Do they have a history? If a nation is making a decision like supporting an ally on a body of lies, that's wrong. Put your own fact-fighting mission, go there, like I have. And I'm not in... And if you come out with the same conclusion, and Israel has started within my world, of the military world, there's been now 3 different high-level multinational military leaders, retired most of them, who have gone into Israel and who had an idea about, before they went there, before they were shown the fields of aid, before they were shown Rafah operations or whatever, they came out with a different understanding. So if it's Canada or whatever government, do your homework.
Yes, hi. My name is Yoram Stecher. I used to be officer in the IDF Combat Engineering, and I have a specific question pertaining to your expertise. Being three times embedded with IDF, what is your opinion about U.S. interference in the war in Gaza in terms of ammunition supply and political? Did it delay the end of the war, basically? The opinion is that it probably influenced, and the war could have ended a few months before, if not U.S. interference.
It's a great question. Let me try to come at an angle that is as apolitical as I like to be. I could give you the example of, if this would have been the United States, what would the United States do? That's a fictional case, right? Although the chairman of the Joint Chiefs, who I was just with less than a week ago, General Milley, was given that question. He was the head military advisor to our presidents for 2 presidents, and said, what do you think we would have done? We wouldn't have carpet bombed. We would follow the laws of war, just like Israel did. We would have used much more force to achieve our goals as rapidly as possible, which would have caused less civilian harm. Because by protracting this war, you've actually caused more civilian harm. You being whoever the international community who said that you gotta find a different way to do it. I study this, so I can tell you about other ways people have done it, and it does, because I had to give you cases in which people actually follow the law of war. So I can't give you cases of Russia and Chechnya, Russia and Syria. I can't give you the Syrian war. I can't give you other cases where people just don't follow the law of war. I can give you the history of militaries approaching this challenge, and they would have done it different than Israel, and it might have led, based on historical cases, to a different end in the time it took, the resources available. The United States would have done it much differently had somebody on our border attacked and killed thousands, raped, murdered, burned, kidnapped hundreds, and then started launching rockets on Los Angeles. We would have used immense amount of combat power to achieve the goal within the rules, just like Israel did, the law of war, while also trying to protect civilians, even though the Hamas is trying to get civilians killed. Absolutely, international pressure has caused Israel to have to figure out a way. And that has been my visits embedding with the IDF, is them figuring out a way when the world, and I won't say who, is saying the correct number of civilian casualties is 0. That means don't fight the war, because there's no context. No matter how many times you evacuate a city, there are some civilians that still stay, especially when your combatant is forcing them to stay. The idea that you could fight a war with 0 civilian casualties is not reality. So yes, the world owns some of the Gaza effects by protracting this war, by saying you can do this, you can't do that, you can use this tool, you can't use that tool. I know where the genesis of most of that's been a lot of my research, whether it's hospitals, 2,000-pound bombs, giving out humanitarian aid, attacking a defender in a tunnel network. I have been flabbergasted, if I use that word, by how Israel has figured out a way to still move forward and achieve their goals despite the context, which all wars are fought within the context, and Israel does have a history of not being allowed to win wars. It has a history of somebody, for oftentimes very legitimate reasons, because of this, where Israel is, who are the threats to it, the role of the Soviet Union, Russia, Islamic regime, you name it. That's what Hamas was hoping for. And Israel still found a way, and that's what I saw in Khan Yunis when I embedded, is they were conducting innovative ways to reduce Hamas's capabilities with historically low civilian casualties. Tell us about...
What can you tell us about what Israel faces with Hezbollah tunnels?
So southern Lebanon, is called the land of tunnels. There are hundreds of miles of tunnels in southern Lebanon. And they're different tunnels. They're embedded, they're deep underground. Many of them what we call deep military complexes. Hezbollah likes to shoot videos, and like they have a mass media team that highlights their underground bases and bunkers inside of mountains. Digging tunnels isn't new. I will say that, again, I've never studied a combatant like Hamas. Use of human shields is what terrorists do. ISIS did it, Al-Qaeda did it, like they all did it. No combatant I've ever studied has said, I need all of my population to die in order to achieve my goals. That's called human sacrifice, not human shield. So building the tunnel, I used to say before I went into Gaza, Hamas built this underground city under the Gaza Strip, bigger than the New York City Metro, the London to the South, the Seoul Metro, and then underneath all the hospitals, the schools, the homes of civilians. And that's true, but what I found is that no, they built the tunnel and then they put the mosque on top of it. So they spent billions of dollars building an environment for war and for the purpose of sacrificing their population to achieve their military strategy. Hezbollah tunnels, there are some under urban areas, and there are some deep underground. It will be a massive problem. It is a massive problem. This is why you're withholding large diameter munitions that can penetrate the earth. Nobody ever asked, well, why are they using 2,000-pound bombs instead of a 500-pound bomb? Because the size of the munition, the type of munition that can penetrate the ground and reach a tunnel, there are a few varieties that do that. A 2,000-pound bomb only, relatively, goes maximum 30 feet underground. There are tunnels in Gaza, let alone in southern Lebanon, that are hundreds of feet underground. There are very few tools that can reach that far underground just by geology.
Hi, my name's Shoshana. My question has to do with, through previous administrations, there's always been this concept that you would protect your allies, and if a country were to harbor terrorists or allow them free passage, you wouldn't turn the blind eye. Now, in the current you're either with us or against us, right? But what we've seen through since October 7th, is that Western nations have allowed a NATO partner like Turkey and Qatar to not only harbor these terrorists and allow them free passage, but basically set the terms of everything, of all the negotiations and all of the requirements. What's changed militarily to allow all of these nations to be like, okay, we're okay with the terrorists now?
You know, we have these terms in the military where I'll give you an answer, which, like, we have these acronyms, and we like to speak in acronyms, which really means it's situationally dependent, context-driven, it's complex. Each one of those nations, whether it's Turkey, a member of NATO, whether it's Qatar, who wants to be, it's a long conversation. I'll say on the positive side, like, I'll give credit where credit's due, like the United States justice system issuing their subpoena of Hamas, which includes those who support in funding and extradition, so that you can formally, through the actual process, I can't make up for the past, but I can say after October 7th, look, I'm going to issue an international warrant for this person's arrest, or anybody financing them, or any of those. That action, which was released, it was filed in January, is massive to stop that trend of, well, if you go there, then there's nothing that we can do about it because of the interconnectedness of our nations. I would like to see, personally, John Spencer, other nations doing that, where Hamas has nowhere to run. And if you harbor them, then there will be consequences. You can't, nations, this is the global international order. Nations can make the decisions. They have sovereignty, they have self-determination. If you harbor a terrorist, then based on the rules of the thing, there will be consequences for that, whether it's financial, economic, diplomatic. So I would like to see us not continuing that trend of saying, well, if you're there, then there's nothing we can do about it.
Hi, I'm Brian. Amir asked a lot of questions, so I feel like I need to participate as well. In your research and the open source information, what happened October 7th? Where was the breakdown? Why was our hearts torn out? Like, what happened?
So because I study the spectrum of conflict, from high intensity combat to terrorist attack. October 7th was a terrorist attack, but it was also an invasion. As clear of a definition of a military invasion of another nation as you can get. Words have meaning. Stop trying to stop trying to reduce what that day actually was. In scale and in magnitude and intent. Why did it happen? I can't fully answer that. I know many of the contributing factors. I know that there's not one answer. There's not one person. There's a long line of decisions made. Yes, some of those include an over-reliance on technology for nations, and all nations do this, by the way, thinking that they don't need an expensive military. They can rely on technology for defense or even offense. And that's a real problem. Most nations' militaries are smaller than they've ever been in their histories. Is the world less violent? So that reliance on technology, a actual paradigm that Hamas are really bad people, but they're contained. Our threat is the Islamic regime trying to build, it is Hezbollah. Those are threats as well, but putting it in a box that led to some decisions about even Hamas, who, give them credit where credit's due, had a multi-year strategy of trying to convince the world and Israel that they had no intentions of attacking Israel. The whole rocket diplomacy, like, we'll launch some rockets at you sometimes, just a show of force, and then you shoot them down. And they actually were trying to convince the world that they had no intentions. Yes, Israel had a plan although we had a packet on Osama bin Laden before 9/11 sitting at the highest level of our security apparatuses as well, Israel had a plan called the Jericho's Wall of Hamas wanting to do October 7th. They viewed it as aspirational. There's no way that they'd be able to amass that type of capability. There is evolutions of a nation getting complacent, even from the kibbutzim weapons policies, from being in their homes to being locked up, to the issuing of weapons permit, to the size of the Gaza division, to the presence of a certain number of personnel on the day of a holiday, a double holiday, the awareness of an intelligence personnel. There was somebody who said, I see this happening. There is a long list of reasons. I don't like using the term black swan, but it was a failure of imagination with years of decisions that led to that day. I can tell you that I'm very confident it will never happen again.
So, first of all, I'm going to apologize. I know there were a lot of hands up, but I will say that we've had John speaking since 1:30 this afternoon at the Israeli consulate. So, since I'm holding the mic, I am going to challenge you. I'm going to ask you one last question as an educator. John, you have some 400 and plus people who came out to listen to you tonight, to listen to your expertise. You taught us a lot. You scared us a lot. And I'd like to ask you a question. As an educator, next action, our action plan, 400 people plus here, what is one thing that we can do based on your expertise and your advice that we can help Israel disseminate the information, whatever it may be? What is that one piece of advice that you can leave us with?
I think I mentioned it, so I will repeat myself because I get this question a lot. What can we do? Fight. You have to fight the lies. Like the awareness of where 41,000 comes from, the fact that it includes everybody who's died, to include those who attacked Israel on October 7th, isn't news. For some reason, we have to fight each lie within our families. My son comes home and says, Dad, is Hamas the good guys? Jesus. That's my son. We all are in this war. So my only recommendation is fight. Fight the disinformation. If I've helped you with a little bit of information you didn't know, it's out there. Spread it within your families, your communities, within your social media networks. Get on X if you're not. I'm a big fan. And fight and don't give up.
Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for coming. I do want to please subscribe to tafseek.com. Amir Avivi will be speaking on September 23rd. Shai Dawidai tickets will go on sale tonight. You'll get a coupon code. John, thank you so much. You are a real mensch. Thank you.